People who spend months at sea. What's the strangest thing you've seen? I was spearfishing around various oil rigs about 10 miles offshore with a group of 8 guys. It was a great day out there. We were bringing in a lot of fish, and everyone was in a good mood. I was very inexperienced back then, having only been spearfishing a handful of times in my life. But I felt relaxed and excited. We were bagging fish non-stop, just focusing on the next catch. After about 6 hours of diving, we decided to leave that spot to check out a wreck that was known for good fishing. When we arrived, there was a thick, dark layer of murky water right at the surface. The water was so dense that you couldn't see anything at all from the boat. It looked like solid ground from above. But if you dove down about 10 feet, the visibility cleared up nicely, showing the structure of the wreck below. We were buddied up, taking turns diving down and taking shots, when one of the guys suddenly yelled out, "Hey, fat bull shark, and she's not acting very friendly." I looked around immediately, but because of that heavy murk near the surface, I couldn't see the animal anywhere. I took a deep breath, dove down into the clearer layer to look for her, but I still couldn't catch a glimpse. Sitting right there at the surface, catching your breath while knowing there's a predator lurking right below you unseen, is a heavy feeling. It completely freezes you. The vulnerability makes your chest tighten up because your eyes can't help you out. I took a few more cautious dives, looking in every direction, and still absolutely nothing. One of the most experienced guys told us not to panic. He had a power head with him. That defensive device basically allows you to attach a 5.56 firearm round to the end of your spear. But right after that shark swooped in out of nowhere and violently snatched someone's fish, he made a realization. He had brought the wrong size power head for his spear. It wouldn't lock into place at all. At that moment, the mood changed. We knew we were completely exposed down there. We scrambled as fast as we could and hopped right back into the boat. I still hadn't seen the animal with my own eyes during the whole ordeal in the water. But shortly after we got out, this massive gray beast broke the surface right next to the boat. It was well over 10 feet long and stupidly thick, just moving slowly through the water. After spending a whole day feeling like a god among fish, I realized in the span of 10 minutes that I was a total stranger out there. A very mortal one. I still can't believe my lack of perception in that water. Here I was, floating right next to this giant predator, and try as I might, I couldn't catch sight of her until we were completely out of the water. Cultural note: bull sharks possess a highly developed sensory organ known as the lateral line system, which detects low-frequency vibrations and minute pressure changes in the water. This biological adaptation allows them to navigate, track prey, and hunt with extreme accuracy in low-visibility environments, such as murky coastal waters and deep shipwrecks, without relying on visual sight. I served in the U.S. Navy for about 10 years, logging tens of thousands of miles at sea aboard a massive aircraft carrier. I spent countless nights standing watch on the flight deck, right in the middle of the dark and out in the middle of the open ocean. The most unsettling thing I ever saw was a huge patch of the ocean glowing brightly. It was glowing a brilliant green, just like nuclear waste in animated cartoons. I have seen various kinds of bioluminescent algae throughout my service, and this looked nothing like them. I had never seen anything like it before, and I have never seen it since. The weirdest incident happened hundreds of miles away from any coast. We came across a massive fire burning right on top of the water. It looked just like the flame at the top of a gas refinery tower, but it was sitting directly on the open ocean with nothing under it, except deep water. The flames were shooting several stories up into the night air. The saddest moment I witnessed involved a fellow sailor trying to jump overboard. He had apparently received a brutal email and pictures from his wife, showing that she was cheating on him, and he made up his mind that he was going to finish it all right there. We were sitting out on the smoke deck. He walked up, bummed a cigarette from us, and then casually asked for the exact time. We told him it was 2300. He looked at us and said that it sounded like a good time to go. In one sudden motion, he lunged toward the chest-high railing that had an open drop straight to the churning water below. Luckily, we reacted faster than he did. We grabbed him by his legs right as he leaned over, wrestled him down to the steel deck, and physically held him pinned down. We basically immobilized him with our own body weight until the master-at-arms officers arrived at the scene. It broke my heart because he was genuinely a good guy. I never saw him on the ship again after that night. He was transferred off the vessel shortly after, and while I do not know what happened to him, I really hope he is doing better today. The funniest thing I ever saw out there was two flying fish colliding mid-air. I was out smoking while we were stationed in the Persian Gulf, looking out at the water, when I saw two fish launch out of the sea from a pretty far distance, flying straight toward each other. I remember thinking to myself that there was no way they were actually going to hit. Then splat! They slammed right into each other and crashed back down into the water. I was in absolute tears laughing on the deck, but nobody else was looking that way to see it happen. Everyone just thought I was losing my mind out there, but I got to witness a true miracle of nature. Cultural note: Milky Seas, also known as Mareal, is a rare marine phenomenon where vast areas of the ocean emit a continuous bright bioluminescent glow caused by billions of luminous bacteria, such as Vibrio harvii, accumulating near the surface. These glowing patches can stretch across hundreds of square miles and remain visible for days, creating an eerie uniform light that differs significantly from standard, movement-triggered algae blooms. One time, I paddled way out into the Gulf of Mexico on a total piece of shit kayak. I went way too far to be safe, especially since I did not bring a safety vest or even any drinking water with me. I was so far out that I actually started to get worried because it was getting difficult to see the coastline behind me. Despite the distance, I was still heading away from the shore, just paddling along completely zoned out in a flow state. That was when, all of a sudden, I noticed a large rock protruding right out of the surface of the water. I was amazed because I had never even heard of rocks existing in the Gulf of Mexico, or at least not in the specific area where I am from. Thinking it might be something special or unique, I decided to paddle closer to check it out up close. I was rapidly approaching the shape, getting so close that I could clearly see giant barnacles growing all over its surface. Then, when I was only about 2 feet away from it, a gigantic head suddenly popped straight out of the water. It absolutely terrified me. I was not expecting anything like that to happen out there. The head was easily as big as a 3-gallon propane cylinder, and it took my brain a long time to even compute what I was looking at. The moment I finally recognized what the creature was, it blasted underwater, moving straight downward like a UFO. It went down with such immense force that it created a violent suction, dragging my kayak almost vertically downward into the water. I barely managed to hold on because that sudden drop was completely unexpected. The ocean water crashed heavily back into the vacuum spot. Luckily, I was using an ocean kayak that was built to float even when completely full of water. My craft shot right back out of that suction gap, moving just like a plastic bottle when you push it underwater and let go. Once the kayak stabilized, my brain finally finished processing the whole situation. I had just run into the biggest sea turtle I had ever seen in my life. This thing was prehistoric in size. It easily had a 4-foot dome height and a 6-foot diameter shell. It did not look like the shape of any standard sea turtle I had ever seen before. It was more steeply shaped, looking very similar to an African tortoise, and its flippers were the size of large pillows. I have still never seen another turtle like that or anywhere near that size since that day. I think I scared him just as bad as he scared me because the animal had a total look of shock on its face. It actually opened its mouth wide as if to gasp in surprise. When it blasted downward to escape, the movement was so powerful that it made a loud, audible sound, like a 400-pound man doing a cannonball from a high diving board. Cultural note: the Gulf of Mexico is home to several protected marine species, including the leatherback and loggerhead sea turtles, which can reach exceptional sizes and weights exceeding 1,000 pounds. When these large marine reptiles dive rapidly to evade a perceived threat, their immense body mass displacing water can create a localized downward localized current or displacement vacuum, capable of destabilizing small, low-profile watercraft like recreational kayaks. I'm not sure if this fully counts, but it was deeply unsettling nonetheless. This past summer I was working on a research vessel up in northern Greenland. Our main assignment was to collect marine DNA samples of the local fish population near an old deserted mining site known as the Black Angel Mine in Marmarillic. During one quiet evening, the entire crew decided to drop anchor, hop onto the shoreline, and take a walk around the abandoned settlement. Eventually, we came across an old, decaying wooden house. The exact moment we reached the threshold, two of our crew members stopped dead in their tracks, turned right around, and refused to go inside. They swore they could feel an overwhelming hostile energy coming from the dark rooms. The rest of us just shrugged it off and kept walking through the building, exploring the old personal items left behind by the miners decades ago. Since raw Greenlandic marble was scattered all over the ground, several of us decided to pick up a few small pieces to take back to the ship as souvenirs. What had started as a fun, light-hearted excursion quickly shifted into a quiet, heavy atmosphere. Only the two guys who refused to step inside were openly superstitious. The rest of us did not think much of their reaction at the time, but as we walked back to the shore, every single one of us kept looking over our shoulders, feeling like we were being intently watched from the rocks. That night aboard the ship, the real terror began. Every single person on board, without exception, suffered from intense, violent nightmares. Not a single crew member slept through the night, and by the time morning came, everyone was so shaken up and exhausted that we could barely perform our routine duties on deck. Later the next day, we encountered an elderly local fisherman from a nearby settlement. When we mentioned that we had gone ashore to explore the old mine site, his expression changed. He immediately asked if we had seen the Kivitok. In Greenlandic culture, a Kivitok is a person who permanently abandons human society due to shame, exile, or conflict, wandering deep into the harsh wilderness where they are said to acquire terrifying, supernatural capabilities. Hearing that story out in the middle of nowhere was enough for us. Whether we were superstitious or not, every single one of us walked over to the railing and threw our marble pieces straight into the ocean, terrified that the wanderer might follow us back out to sea. Cultural note: in the Inuit tradition of Greenland, the Kivitok represents the deepest collective fear exile from the community. Originally, they were individuals who fled into the mountains out of shame, anger, or dishonor, where the extreme loneliness of the Arctic transformed them into mythological beings with fur, claws, and superhuman strength. Modern inhabitants strictly respect abandoned settlements such as the Black Angel Mine due to the taboo of desecration, the belief that taking fragments of earth or stones from these sites drags along the wrath and spiritual harassment of the Kivitok, who still claims them as their home. This story is going to remain buried, but I have yet to find any kind of logical explanation for it. The event took place back in 2007. I cannot remember the exact time of the year, but I want to say it was during the summer. I was serving on a 378-foot-high endurance cutter, the USCGC Dallas, positioned about 300 nautical miles off the coast of Massachusetts. Out there you experience absolutely zero light pollution. I was standing what we call flywatch. This station is located on the very top of the bridge, completely exposed to the outside elements. Right in the center of the platform, there are these giant, powerful binoculars mounted on a stand, which everyone on board refers to as the big eyes. Our main job up there was to report any visual contacts down to the lower bridge through a physical sounding tube. It was a manual backup just to make the officers aware in case a target was too small or low to be picked up by the radar screens. Anyway, it was about 1 in the morning. There was not a single cloud in the sky. The water was incredibly calm, and the only light came from the moon. I had a break-and-watch partner with me that night, which is just our term for a new guy learning how to properly stand the watch. 2 distinct things felt off that night before the main event took place. First, I noticed a specific star in the sky that was casting a sharp, bright light reflection across the surface of the water, looking almost like a miniature version of the moon's reflection. The strange part was that it was not even the brightest star in the sky that night. It was not an impossible sight, but in all my time at sea, I had never seen a single star do that before. Second, our vessel suddenly lost all electrical power about 5 minutes after I first pointed out that star. A total blackout like this was not too uncommon for us because these cutters were pretty old and required constant maintenance. Following procedure, I just called down through the tube and reported the power outage. Then came the part that still makes no sense. About 5 minutes after the ship went dark, it was suddenly as if someone had flipped a massive light switch in the sky to instantly turn on the daytime. It was sudden, blinding daylight, revealing a perfectly blue sky all around us. The phenomenon lasted for about 3 seconds, and then the environment snapped instantly back into complete pitch darkness. I know exactly what lightning looks like at night. I'd been stationed on that boat for about 1.5 years at that point, and I had seen countless severe lightning storms out on the open ocean. With lightning, you always see a clear source point, and the light flickers, flashes, and fades. This was not that at all. This was a total uniform illumination of the entire atmosphere, showing a bright blue daytime sky in the dead of night. I was losing my mind up there. I completely threw out the standard military protocol for reporting contacts to the bridge, leaned over the sounding tube, and just shouted, "Did you guys down there just see that?" Through the tube, I could hear the officers joking around about it inside the bridge. One person laughed and said that we were probably being attacked by aliens, and then I heard a few others chuckling. I turned to my trainee and asked him directly what he had just seen. He looked at me and described the exact same thing I had witnessed. He saw the clear blue sky and everything. When our shift finally ended and the next watch relief arrived, I went straight down into the bridge to ask what the official consensus was. Nobody had any real idea. They just shrugged it off like it was nothing, completely ignoring how insane the whole thing actually was. My mind has been blown ever since that night, and to this day, I have yet to find an answer. Cultural note. The USCGC Dallas was a Hamilton-class high-endurance cutter utilized by the United States Coast Guard for long-range maritime law enforcement and search and rescue operations. Due to the extreme isolation of standing fly watch on the open ocean, watchstanders rely heavily on visual observation using specialized big eyes binoculars to detect hazards that might escape early radar detection, such as wooden hulls or low-profile rafts. I am in the Coast Guard, and once upon a time a large group of Russian warships decided to conduct exercises right off the coast of Hawaii. While they never officially crossed the boundary into us territorial waters, they were extremely close, essentially testing us and seeing what we were going to do about it. We had just gotten underway from Oahu, and were 2 days into steaming straight north toward Alaska. Out of nowhere, we received a direct order from very high up in the chain of command to turn the ship completely around and head straight back to Hawaii. They needed our cutter to monitor the entire Russian armada that was sitting right off the coast. The Navy did not have a single warship ready to get underway on short notice, so for 5 full days, our Coast Guard vessel followed those ships around until a group of Navy destroyers could be prepared to meet up with us. For those 5 days, we just kept a constant eye on them through the visual monitors and radar. Then one morning around 3 in the morning, I was suddenly jolted awake by a strange screeching noise. I am normally a very heavy sleeper, but this specific sound was unlike anything I had ever heard while living on a ship. It sounded almost like a bottle rocket firing off in the distance, cutting right through the quiet of the night. I lay there in my rack for a while, just staring at the steel ceiling and trying to figure out what it could possibly be. My first thought was that someone on board had brought one of those annoying prank noise machines, the tiny ones that run on button batteries and keep emitting high-pitched sounds until you physically smash them. The sound was so uniform and precise that I actually started timing it on my watch. It acted just like a metronome. Every 47 seconds, it would screech loudly through the structure. Then it would slowly fade away into complete silence. Then it would repeat. I got out of my rack and started looking all around my living area, but I could not find a single thing. The sound never got louder or quieter, no matter where I moved. My rack was on the 3rd deck, which is located completely below the ship's waterline. I walked up one ladder to the 2nd deck, which sits partially under the water and partially above it, and I could still hear that exact same frequency reverberating through the bulkheads. While I was walking the passageway, I ran into my buddy who was also wandering around looking for the source of the noise. Neither of us could make any sense of it, so we eventually gave up and went back to bed. The next morning at breakfast, the entire mess deck was talking about it. Some of the old salts in our crew who had decades of sea time under their belts finally explained it to us. Those screeching pulses were active sonar pings. Our hull was being continuously painted by active sonar, most likely from a silent Russian submarine tracking us from the deep. That rhythmic metallic screeching lasted for 3 full days. Cultural note: active sonar systems emit concentrated acoustic sound pulses, pings, through the water that travel until they strike an object and bounce back to the receiver, allowing submarines to calculate the exact distance, speed, and heading of a target hull. When a steel-hulled vessel is pinged by high-power active sonar from a nearby submarine, the sound energy physically vibrates the ship's outer plating below the waterline, producing a metallic, repeating screeching sound clearly audible to crew members sleeping in lower deck compartments. Like what you see? Subscribe to the Reddit Oracle for more. Not so much what I saw, but what I experienced out there. I was once underway in the Gulf of Alaska during a rough November gale. The waves were running up to 35 feet high, with some massive rollers hitting 45 feet. An uncommon occurrence on the diesel-electric ship I was on was a cyclo-converter tripping. Whenever that specific part failed, the vessel would temporarily lose all electrical power and propulsion. Everything would just cut out until the ship electricians could manually reset the system. Well, that exact system failure happened right in the middle of that November gale. I simply cannot explain how strange it feels for the heavy vessel you are living on to suddenly go dead quiet. It happens in an instant. The engine roar disappears, and all of a sudden, you can clearly hear the outside waves slapping against the hull. You hear the structural steel bending and flexing under the immense pressure. You are standing there in the dark, knowing you are completely at the mercy of the sea. You know that if the ship loses its bearing and goes beam to, meaning the massive waves start hitting the vessel directly from the side, there is a real possibility of capsizing right there. It is easy to forget when you are out at sea that the only thing keeping you alive is a bunch of steel welded together. At that exact moment, I was fully aware of our vulnerability, and it completely humbled me. Thankfully, we trained frequently for this exact scenario, and the crew had everything fired back up relatively quickly. Another time, I recall, happened on a different watch when the ship took a rogue wave. Those things are real, and I believe they account for a massive number of unexplained shipwrecks. It was late at night, and I was standing watch up on the bridge. We were passing through a heavy storm, taking the waves directly off the bow with absolutely zero visibility outside the windows. As a ship moves through a storm, there is normally a pretty standard pattern that your body gets used to. You ride up a wave for a bit, and then you fall down the back of the wave for a bit. It becomes rhythmic. Well, this time we started riding up a wave and got to the point where the ship should have started its downward ride, but the bow just kept climbing and climbing into the dark. And then it happened. We finally started our ride down the back of this giant wall of water. All of us on the bridge braced ourselves, scrambling to find something bolted down to hold on to, but the drop was so violent that we all fell straight to the deck anyway. Anything that was not heavily secured for sea came crashing down all around us in the dark. Manuals, tables, computers, printers, you name it. Our captain, who was fast asleep in his cabin below, called up to the bridge on the internal line, asking if we had collided with another vessel. The impact woke the entire crew up. Rogue waves are real. I cannot imagine being in a smaller boat or taking one of those walls of water broadside. Cultural note. For centuries, rogue waves were dismissed as mere maritime myths, until 1995, when the Dropner oil platform in the North Sea officially recorded an 85-foot wall of water using laser sensors. Unlike standard storm waves, rogue waves are unpredictable anomalies that reach over twice the size of the surrounding sea state. They are formed by the mathematical convergence of smaller wave crests, packing a crushing impact force capable of instantly foundering even large, ocean-going vessels. A friend of mine was a commercial gill netter off the Florida coast. He came from a long family line of traditional gill netters. They used classic Mitchell boats for their work. These were about 40 feet long, built from wood and fiberglass, and had no keel underneath. He always described the way those boats handled bad weather by saying they pitch and roll in heavy seas like a total wild ride. Their routine was straightforward. They would set a massive 3-mile net out in the dark and leave it in the water, drifting right alongside it until dawn. Once the sun came up, they spent the entire day reeling the net back in, picking it clean, and resetting it in a new spot for the next night. He described what it was like trying to sleep below deck without any air conditioning. You were completely covered in dried fish guts and ocean grime, going without a shower for a week at a time in the brutal Florida summer heat. I was completely shocked listening to him, so I asked 2 naive questions. My first question was why they did not just jump into the ocean to take a quick bath and cool off. He gave me a one-word answer: sharks. Apex predators follow those Mitchell boats around like food trucks at noon. Nobody ever got into the water unless essential hull repairs had to be made. My second question was how he could possibly stand sleeping below deck in 98-degree weather with zero airflow. I asked why they did not just sleep outside on the open deck, where they could at least catch a cool breeze. He gave me a wide-eyed, dead serious look, and proceeded to tell me a story about his grandfather. His grandfather always insisted on sleeping below deck. Every other man on the crew preferred to sleep up top under the stars. One morning, his grandfather woke up in the dark, badly concussed, and bleeding from his head. He stumbled around the cabin only to realize the boat had been literally rolled broadside 360 degrees all the way over by a massive rogue wave in the dead of night. When he climbed up to the deck, every single man and boy of his crew was completely gone. The ocean had swept them all away. Their bodies were never recovered. Cultural note: Mitchell boats are low-profile, flat-bottomed commercial fishing vessels historically used in shallow coastal waters. Because they lack a heavy ballast keel, these hulls have very low secondary stability when struck broadside by a sudden steep wave force. The vessel can experience a rapid, complete 360-degree roll, instantly clearing any unsecured crew from the upper deck into the open ocean. I am no longer at sea, but when I was a younger chap with romantic ideas about the ocean, I used to spend months on end on cargo ships. Mostly tankers, crude oil VLCC structures, and refined product tankers. I also spent a little time in oil and gas and towing. I finally came ashore in 2017 with a Master Unlimited ticket, sailing at the time as chief officer. My last ship was a self-discharging bulk carrier. Anyway, I digress. This is not so much about a physical thing that I saw out there that was creepy. I saw plenty of interesting sights that I wouldn't have encountered anywhere else. This is about where your mind goes during the watch. I was working as second mate on a tanker distributing refined oil products around the coast of New Zealand. A yacht had sailed from a port on the east coast, bound for another harbor just a bit further down the coastline, but it had completely disappeared. There was a solo sailor on board aside from his dog. Nonetheless, the official search proved fruitless, and after a while the authorities suspended the operation. However, for weeks afterward, at about 1:30 in the morning, the Rescue Coordination Center would broadcast a plea. It came right at the end of the regular weather and navigation warning broadcast, asking for the specific yacht to make contact if it could hear the message and was able to do so. I would sit there in the pitch black of the bridge, chain-smoking and working on my 7th cup of coffee. I would stare out into the solid black horizon, just imagining the guy out there. I wondered if he had suffered a sudden, severe medical emergency on board, with that exact same broadcast playing out loudly on his own radio, while his pet was forced to do the unthinkable to avoid starving to death. Or I would picture him having lost his footing and fallen over the side into the freezing water. I imagined what it would be like to float there, watching your own yacht sail indifferently off into the distance, while your dog paces the cockpit, agitated and completely unable to help you. You would be floating there knowing you were totally done for, with only a matter of hours, if that, before the cold or absolute exhaustion took you under. Or worse, I would imagine the animals starving and weak on that drifting boat weeks later, listening to that same static broadcast in the dark. The places your mind goes when you are completely by yourself in the dark. In the end, authorities found the yacht drifting hundreds of miles off course, with its sails shredded and the automatic rudder turned on. The sailor had fallen overboard exactly as I imagined. The lifeboat, the kayak, and the emergency beacon were still intact in their place. There was no trace of him left. The dog was still alive. Cultural note: this story refers to the real disappearance of Captain Paul van Rensburg in March 2010 off New Zealand. His yacht, the Tafadzwa, was found weeks later with his dog Juanita still alive, who managed to resist alone on the high seas for 16 days. The authorities determined that the captain accidentally fell into the water while manipulating the sails under bad weather, having the automatic rudder activated. The vessel continued sailing alone, moving away from him and leaving the pet as the sole witness to the tragedy. I am a contract mariner. That means I disappear into the massive blue area on the map for 6 to 8 months out of every single year. If you are asking about creepy stuff, honestly, there is not much of the usual ghost stories out here. The heavy sound of moaning steel caused by slack tanks when the ship is rolling hard can be a bit unnerving. St. Elmo's fire is pretty neat to witness. Seeing a Fata Morgana, which people call the Flying Dutchman, is a beautiful thing to look at in real life. But after you spend enough time out here, the only thing that really spooks you is a direct problem that influences your actual survival. Every single unsettling situation I have ever been a part of came down to raw, no-nonsense emergencies. Like the time a fire alarm went off in the engine control room, I was the designated first responder down there, tasked with finding out if we were facing a disaster or just a broken concilium sensor. Walking down into a wall of thick, toxic smoke coming straight from burning electronics in the high-voltage room, that is an absolute nightmare. Or the night we had an emergency weather sortie because our anchor started dragging. The ship was rolling 30 degrees with only 50 feet of underkeel clearance. The heavy winds were actively pushing our hull toward the solid rock of the nearby island. 10 shots of chain were not enough to hold us. We were about to run aground in a 55,000-ton, 800-foot ship. Just when we finally managed to get the hook up to move out of there, our steering and propulsion completely cut out. That is true terror. I have seen brand new million-dollar sport fishing boats capsize and bobbing around like a cork 1,000 miles away from any piece of land, no signs of life around them. I have also seen tiny little songbirds skipping along the surface of the ocean, barely clinging to life, but flying as hard as their wings allow to find solid ground. Some of the saddest things I have ever witnessed out here are those little birds hitting the water as they fly further out into the open sea, hoping with everything they have that they will stumble across a place to land. I do not know. I am sitting here at a port bar having a Yingling right now, so I am probably just rambling. But to answer the question, the most unsettling thing about being out there is the bottomless depth of sadness, loneliness, and heartache. You will go places in your own mind that words will never be able to describe. Cultural note: the term Fata Morgana, named after the legendary shape-shifting sorceress from the Arthurian legends, is a mirage that occurs in the ocean due to a thermal inversion, where a layer of cold air is trapped beneath warm air. This phenomenon refracts light so radically that it distorts objects on the horizon, causing distant ships to stretch, invert, or appear to float in the air like gigantic structures. Throughout history, this visual effect has been directly responsible for sailors reporting ghost ship sightings. Technically, I have 2 separate stories from my time out here. One remains completely unexplained to this day, while the other might not sound terrifying at first, but it definitely leaves you thinking. The first incident happened about a year ago, and the second one took place just 4 days ago. I will start with the first story, which was by far the most unsettling and baffling situation I have ever faced in my life. It all happened during a routine night shift, while our vessel was transiting the open waters of the Atlantic Ocean. I was working as the second officer, and my watch ran from midnight to 4 in the morning. To keep myself awake, stay active, and relax a bit during those long hours of surveillance, I used to walk continuous laps around the central bridge console. It was just a practical way to get some exercise in a confined space. During one of my passes by the large windows that face the bow, I caught movement down on the deck. Someone was walking along the starboard side, moving from the aft of the ship toward the front. On a large cargo vessel, seeing a crew member outside is not completely crazy, but what caught my attention immediately was the time on the clock. It was exactly 1:30 in the morning. The crew is allowed to go out on deck whenever they want, so I did not think much of it at first, and just kept walking. I completed a full lap around the console, and when I got back to the same window looking out at the sea, I checked down below again to see if he was still there. This time, I noticed the person had stopped completely. He was standing right in the open space between cargo hold number 1 and the forward windbreaker. What struck me as odd was that his back was turned toward the bridge, and he was just staring straight ahead into the dark toward the bow. I stopped dead in my tracks by the glass to watch what he was doing out there at that hour. Suddenly, the individual spun his body around with an unnatural speed. He locked his eyes directly onto the bridge window where I was standing, raised his arm, and began to wave his hand from side to side in a constant motion. The rest of his body remained perfectly still and rigid. That movement gave me an immediate, uneasy feeling in my stomach. Standing there in the dark, I began to notice details about his appearance that made no sense. The figure was wearing a solid white overall. White gear is normal for officers in some international companies, but at our firm, every single uniform issued to officers and crew ratings is bright red with silver reflective strips across the shoulders. He was also wearing an orange safety helmet. We keep a couple of those on board for specific tasks, but company regulations strictly require the entire crew to wear white helmets. Another detail that made me freeze was realizing that it should have been physically impossible for him to look me in the eyes. Every single interior light on the bridge was turned off to preserve my night vision for the ocean, while the high-intensity deck lights below were fully on. If you try to look up from the deck under those conditions, the glare creates a massive reflection on the glass, turning the windows into mirrors, yet his head remained completely locked onto my exact position. While that shape stood out there in the dark, mechanically waving its hand, I walked over to the main console. I picked up the portable radio and tried to call him on our working channel to ask him to identify himself. I got nothing back but static. The person did not stop moving his hand. The strangest part was that his face seemed to follow my steps from a distance. I walked from one end of the bridge to the other to reach the main radio station near the chart table on the port side, and his head turned in perfect synchronization with my movement. After trying to call him a second time over the loudspeaker with no success, I stepped up to the exterior lighting console and flipped the heavy switches. The ship's high-power floodlights immediately turned on, drowning the entire forward deck in an intense white light. When I looked up from the switches toward the bow, the deck was completely empty. I stood there thoroughly confused. I figured he might have been startled by the sudden light and run to hide inside the enclosed stairway that leads down to the paint store. Or maybe he stepped into the access tunnel that goes to the forward station inside the windbreaker. I decided to leave the floodlights on and wait. About 30 minutes passed without a single sign of movement. I finally turned the lights off to get my night vision back and kept my eyes glued to that exact spot for the rest of my watch. But the silhouette never showed up again. The next morning during breakfast, I asked around the mess room if anyone had gone down to the deck at 1:30 in the morning. Every single crew member assured me they were fast asleep in their cabins during those hours. Looking at their expressions and how they reacted, I could tell they were telling the truth. Besides, I verified that nobody on board owned a white overall since the supply locker only distributes the official Red Company suits. It also made no operational sense for anyone to be out there. We had no safety rounds scheduled, and no extra lookouts were on duty. Normally, I am the only living soul awake in the entire ship's superstructure during my watch. A few guys thought it was just a mean prank by the sailors, but nobody knew anything about it, even when I spoke to them privately and asked them to tell me the truth without fearing any trouble. I believed them because they had no reason to lie. A joke like that would have been pretty good, and we would have laughed about it together. But months have passed, and no one has ever admitted to it. What still bothers me about that night was the rigid, unnatural way that shape moved, and that sudden habit of standing completely still while staring straight at me through a dark window. I have no logical explanation for what my eyes saw. The way he vanished the exact second the lights came on still makes no sense to me. That same morning, I went down to physically inspect the exact spot where he had been standing. There was absolutely nowhere to hide. The stairway to the paint store and the entrance to the bosun's locker are locked with heavy padlocks every single evening, and I confirmed they were still untouched and secured under lock and key. That has been my only truly bizarre experience during my 5 years working at sea. I know for a fact it was not a hallucination caused by exhaustion. I was watching that person for at least 5 straight minutes from the moment he walked down the starboard side until he planted his feet to stare at me. He only disappeared when the light hit the deck. The second story happened just a few days ago while we were transiting the Indian Ocean. I was sitting in my watchman chair on the bridge when a very clear voice suddenly cracked through channel 16 on the Marine VHF radio. The voice coming out of the speaker pronounced the exact name of my vessel without a single mistake. However, the transmission was clipped, and I could not make out the name of the ship that was calling us. In Maritime protocol, you are always supposed to say the name of the vessel you were calling first, and then identify your own station. The call repeated a second time with the exact same clarity. I immediately checked our electronic chart display screen and the main radars to see what ship was nearby. To my surprise, the screen was completely clean. There was not a single radar blip or target signal for miles around us. I tried to reply to the call several times, asking for their identification, but the other side went completely silent. Since I couldn't shake the doubt, I used the radio's playback function because our modern bridge equipment allows us to replay the last incoming transmissions. When I replayed the audio slowly, I confirmed the voice was stating my ship's name perfectly, but the very last word you could hear at the tail end of the transmission right before the feed cut out was a faint whisper saying, "Help." It did not sound like someone screaming in a frantic panic. It sounded like a low, desperate whisper right against the microphone. I called back out into the night, but the silence was total. This second event could easily be explained by the presence of local fishing boats that often turn off their automated identification systems to avoid being tracked, but the fact that absolutely nothing showed up on our main radar screen makes the whole thing very strange. On top of that, we were in an extremely isolated area of the high seas, nearly 200 nautical miles southwest of the Christmas Islands. It is highly unusual to find small boats that far away from the coastline. However, as I sit here typing this out, I can see faint flickering lights far out on the horizon, which suggests there is some fishing activity in the sector tonight. So, thinking about it rationally, it was most likely just a bored fisherman out there in the dark, playing around with the emergency frequency. Cultural note: Marine VHF Channel 16 is internationally designated as the maritime distress, safety, and calling frequency, monitored continuously by all vessels at sea. While commercial ships are strictly regulated, small artisanal fishing vessels in remote areas often utilize emergency channels for casual communication or pranks, frequently evading radar detection due to their wooden or fiberglass hulls, which do not reflect radar waves efficiently back to large ships. If you like these stories, make sure to subscribe to the Reddit Oracle.